Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. This is Victoria Beal. I'm the director of the Ohio LTAP Center, which is a part of the Office of Local Programs at ODOT. We are so happy to have you on the webinar today. I'm going to be doing double duty. I'm your presenter and the moderator. So as we move through things, I would ask that you please put questions in the question box, and I will get to them as quickly as I am able during the presentation. Also, we have some handouts for you in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. It's a copy of this presentation, and then there's also an outline for the presentation in there. So if you're not able to download those, though, don't worry, because we'll send a follow-up email out with links to those handouts as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get us going here. I wanted just to let you know that I have had a pretty varied experience with grant writing through the 25 years I've been doing it so far. And, I one point in time did add up the amounts that I was able to secure through grants. And, I don't particularly write for extremely large grants, but for the ones that I have received, and especially our safety training that we're able to offer from NHI through the LTAP program, we've received over $1 million just in that grant funding. So I've had experience not only with grant writing through my position at ODOT, but also through volunteer work in my community, and I'm going to talk to you from both those aspects. Today's session is not about where to go and find the money so much as how to get yourself started and organized. And that's why I gave you an outline, because I felt like it would make a good little checklist as you're working through the process. So I would like to get to know you guys a little better. And what we're going to do is have some real-time polling as a part of our process here. So if you've got a smartphone, you can scan that QR code and it'll open you up to our polling. But if you want to just use your computer, or you can still use your smartphone and go to menti.com and then type in the code 424768. And that's going to be on the screens as well at the top for the questions that we're going to have. So to get you guys started, I just wanted to kind of do a warm-up question, get everybody a chance to get in the system and get themselves loaded up for the responses. So this is kind of a fun question. Want to find out what team you are. Oh my gosh, we got a team masterpiece right off the bat. We hardly ever get one of those responses right off the bat. That's my Saturday night at my house. I sit around and watch Masterpiece Theater. But I did put the Game of Thrones in there for folks. So, and I see we've got a response there. Oh, and Team Nature, absolutely. I've done this with one of my colleagues before, and I don't know, those of you who know Michelle May, she's the reason I put the Team Social in there, because she could never find a big enough crowd. So as you're responding, I just want to make sure you see that in the bottom right-hand corner, it tells us how many people have responded. So right now we've got about 150 of you on this webinar. So I'll just be checking to see who, I can't see who particularly responded, like what your response is, but I do want to give everybody enough time to get, a response in as we move through these screens, because some of them aren't going to necessarily just be picking an item. Some of them is actually going to be some responses that I'd like for you to give me. So great, we got our warm-up question out of the way. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. It looks like Team Nature has won, and that's fantastic. It's a beautiful day out there today, so make sure you get outside and enjoy part of it. I'd like to know, though, what employer type are you from? Because I know when I looked at the list of those who had registered, we have people from a lot of different areas and agencies and employers. So just want to get a feel so I could make sure that I'm making my examples relevant to what it is that you'll be working on. All right, you guys are getting really good at this response. Thank you. Yeah, it looks like local public agencies right now is in the lead. So, and that's fine, because that's a primary audience for the LTAP program. So, and then we also have someone put in local government, not agency. That's good. Thank you for making that distinction. They put that in the question box. All right, so we got 43% local public agency, but the consultants and the state agencies are chasing that pretty quickly. And we also have quite a few in the other. All right, we're going to keep going here. So this is a roadmap. I like to do a little roadmap for anything that I'm working on. And if you look on the upper left-hand corner, I'm just going to kind of take you through the topics we're going to cover in the presentation today. We're going to go over how you determine your need and things that you'll need to pull together there. And then what information can you gather ahead of time before you even find out about a grant? We're also going to talk about looking for grants which address your needs, and then how to review the grant requirements in detail once you find a grant that you want to apply for, and then how you can plan out your strategy for actually completing the grant application, because some of them can be pretty intensive. What to request, um, and the big part of grant writing I have found through the years is answering the questions that are asked. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about relationships as well. Because once you start down this path, you're going to find that there's a community of people who not only write the grants, but give the grants. And I think it's very important to build relationships within that community. All right, so curious to know, what is your experience with writing grants? And like I said, we're not tracking what answer anyone's giving, so please be honest here, because I want to make sure that I know the audience I have. It's not like having everybody in a room the way we used to do before the pandemic. So I'm glad that we're getting lots of responses here. And it looks like the majority of you are just getting started. So this is perfect for you. And for those who have been writing grants for a while, hopefully you can pick up some tips and tricks through this presentation. And I would love to hear your feedback even afterwards, if there's anything you feel that I could add in or ways to make this presentation stronger. All right, we're going to keep going here. So let's talk about the first step, which is determining your need, because really you have to have a need that you want to apply for. And you see the screen there, we've got lots of little want stickers, and then need is that one in the middle that's blue. And grants and people who give grants do not want to fund wants. They want to fund needs, and that's really important. So as you're starting to prepare for this process, it's important to make sure that you can describe the problem that is going to be fixed with the grant funding you're asking for, and make sure that you can demonstrate that it's a true need. Grant funding really, sometimes people talk about, oh, there's so much money that goes, unawarded. And, while that might be true in some areas, the majority of the areas have so many more needs than what the money will fund. So you need to make sure that it is a true need and you're communicating that. And you got to have a clear plan on what you're going to spend the grant funding on. When I've written grants, I was a member of our local park board for a while. I made certain to know that what it was we were going to spend the funds on, and I made certain to have multiple quotes from different vendors and make sure it was always objective, the information we were providing. So as a part of determining your need, you also want to make certain that you can explain in your application what is your plan for delivering this project, because people don't want to give money to folks who can't explain how it is they're going to use the money to complete the project. Knowing how you're going to measure success of your project. And a lot of times, and we're going to talk about this a little later, when you get into the details of the application itself, if their measurement of success and your measurement of success are the same, then you usually have a good an excellent chance at getting awarded because you're in alignment there. So, look at how you're going to measure success, but also make sure when you get into the actual application that, you're customizing that measurement of success to what it is that they're looking for as well. Another piece is, and a lot of people don't think through to this portion of it, is knowing how you're going to cover ongoing costs without further grant funding. Because very rarely do grant funders want to fund a project if there's no plan to continue maintaining or taking care of the item without additional grant funding. So that's important as well. So now this is one of those deals where you get to type in, tell us in a word or two some of the needs that you want to fund with grants. It's going to build us a little word cloud here. So if more than one of you types the same thing in, the word will get bigger compared to other words. I know it takes a second normally to start getting this. Oh, there we go. Those are some of the things I thought I would see. Yes, safety normally is a pretty big one. Roads, bridges, community, equipment. That's great. And you see that with the word, I love word clouds because, as people continue to add, you can see which ones have come from multiple sources because they're the bigger words. So, rural transportation, absolutely. Outdoor classrooms, yep, that would be awesome. Pedestrian enhancements, critically needed. This is great. You guys speak my language. This is wonderful. All right, so keep those ideas in mind as we keep moving forward through this presentation. Someone did put an item in the question box. They've said after school programming and safety. Absolutely. All right, we're going to keep going here. So step 2, and this is a part you can do anytime, and I would encourage you, even after this webinar completes today, if you have some time, start digging into this. Get information together about who you are as an agency, as a if you're a consulting firm, what your firm is, or if you're working with an agency, this is pieces that you can put together ahead of time. What do you do and why are you important to your customers? One thing I want to mention, which I still think is some new information to a lot of people. Normally when you'd make a grant application, especially for federal money, you would have to have a DUNS number. The DUNS numbers are gone. They're no longer something that's being required. What is being required is what they call a UEI, a unique entity identifier. If you have not gotten your unique entity identifier yet, I would encourage you to just go ahead and take the time and get it taken care of, because getting this is a stepped process. It takes a few days, and you don't want to be down to the last day when the application's due and start the process for getting this unique entity identifier, the UEI. So please take some time and get this taken care of. Other things that you can pull together ahead of time is, an explanation of who you are. And, the organizational chart shown here, that's the way that agency was explaining who they are and who they have, but you can do it in a number of different ways. You want to explain who's in charge, how you have the support to complete the project that you're asking for the funding for. And then normally in the grant application, they also want to know what's your classification for tax purposes. So dig into that and make sure that you have that information up front. One of the very first times I applied for a grant after I started working for ODOT, I had to find this information, and lo and behold, ODOT's considered part of the state of Ohio. So here I thought I was, our tax classification was, state agency, but really our tax classification was state of Ohio. And that was, I had pull that information and provide a W-9, and I had to use the state of Ohio's W-9. So make sure, like I said, this is bits and pieces you can get together and have ready. before you ever get to the point of applying for a grant. Make sure that you get this information figured out. Another thing that I think is very, very important is examples of projects that have been completed by your agency or your organization that are same or similar to what you're asking for funding for. So you can show them that you have a track record, a history of having completed projects, so they don't have to worry that if they give you this funding that you're not going to end up using it and have to give it back. Make sure you get those, scenarios, those case studies put together and have them ready to plug into the application. And this will save you time, because normally when you get a great notice of grant funding, you're on a pretty tight time frame to pull together the information that's specific to that application. So these more general pieces you can have already in your back pocket and ready to go. So based on the information we just discussed in that section, how many of you feel you have that type of information ready? And it's okay if you don't, as maybe you have some of it ready. So, and for those of you who weren't able to check yes, like I said, this is some homework that you can do even before you get the grant application opened up and start looking to try to apply. So, and the outline that I gave you for the webinar today, that'll be a good tool for you to go through, and under number 2, you can kind of check those things off and say, yes, we've got this, or we need to get this done. So good. Thank you for the responses. There's also something in the question box. I'm going to open that up. Oh, someone said yes, that they've got it. Good for you. All right. So when you start looking for grants which address your needs that you've already defined, I always think of the old phrase of a square peg, round hole, or round peg, square hole. You've got to make sure that you are looking at what the grant is really going to fund and what do they want to address through the grant. Because one of the worst things you can do is submit a grant application for something that wasn't really what they intended to fund, because then they're going to feel like you've wasted their time. And, while you may want to look at applying just to get the experience, that relationship building is really important, and people don't like it when other folks mess with their time and feel like they had to waste their time on something that was obviously not something that was going to be funded under the grant. So please make sure you're looking at that. Look at how the grantor is going to measure success, because if your measurements don't line up, that might be another good reason why you just want to take a pass on this grant application. So wanted to know, how many of you are subscribed to grants.gov? Oh, good. Some people are. Great. If you're not, I would encourage you to go out and subscribe to grants.gov. That is the federal portal where they put all of the grants that are being awarded. And, they also have a newsletter they send out periodically. So you can get information about grants that are coming up. You can be subscribed to be notified when grants in certain areas are being made available. So I definitely encourage you to get that subscription going. And if, I don't personally feel like I'm getting overwhelmed with emails from them, but if you do feel like it's something you just want to look at periodically, you can always set up a folder on your email and have things moved in there, and then make a note to check it, once a week or once a month or however often you want to. So, all right. So you found a grant and you feel like what they want to fund is what you need money for. So this next step is making sure you review all of the grant requirements, and not only review them, but start making a plan on how you're going to get them completed. So the very first thing I look at, besides is this grant really going to fund what it is that we have a need for, is I look at what the deadline is to get the grant submitted. Because if it's something that we aren't going to be able to get done in a timely manner, or get done and do a good job at, then we might take a pass on it. But I always work backwards from the deadline. Um, Also, be really, really careful about submission requirements and make sure you follow those. I had an email earlier today for someone who was sending in a request to have a project funded for my TRB committee. That's the Transportation Research Board. And they emailed it in. And then I looked down further, and in the email, it says you have to use this portal to send in your requests for funding. So luckily they sent this a day early. So now we're working through getting the submission in through the portal. But, look at how it needs to be submitted and what needs to be submitted. Make yourself a list of the items you need to pull together. Also, look at the reporting requirements, because sometimes, a grant looks like it's going to be wonderful, but if you don't have the ability to do the reporting that's needed afterwards, that's a part of the grant requirements, and it's going to look really bad if you don't. So, a good example of this is there's a grant that within ODOT folks are allowed to apply for technology transfer. It's called a T2 grant that the Federal Highway Administration has, and they require quarterly reports, and it's um, a 3 or 4 page deal. So if the person who's applying for that funding decides they don't want to do those quarterly reports, then there's a problem. So I always make sure they know up front that those quarterly reports are due. Um, let's see, I've got a question that came in. It says, why does it seem you're given a short time to do the grant? It seems like only experienced grant writers will make the deadlines. I think what they do is they put the time frame out. Maybe it's a 30-day, 60-day time frame based on other funding that they have to award, because they try to make sure they do a thorough job of reviewing all the applications that come in. So, the people who are awarding the money, a lot of times are on a tight schedule, just like the ones that are applying for it. And hopefully, if you get pieces and parts ready to go ahead of time, it won't feel like such a push to get that application in. And I think that's where, the experienced grant writers, they know these things and they have pieces and parts ready ahead of time. So then they can just focus on pulling together whatever else they need for the grant application. Talking about requirements, another piece that you want to be really careful with is make sure that when you apply for funding that you understand any additional requirements that that funding is making of you, like the environmental requirements for Section 4F and 6F. You're looking at if you get funding, for, say, to purchase land. I know that we did this in our community. There was an application made to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and the land that we received funding for has to forever be a park now. So, it's important to make sure you understand those requirements. 2 CFR 200, that was financial requirements that were put out by the feds a number of years ago. And as a part of that, that did give some heartburn to a number of people who were getting grant funding, because it required specific time tracking to report time. And it wasn't just, the hours the person spent on the project. Now they had to track all the hours the person worked in that week to show which hours of all the hours worked were actually being charged to the project versus hours that were being worked in towards other things. So just make sure that you know what the requirements are and that you're going to be able to follow through with those. And this slide really talks about some more higher level complex requirements. So, again, talking to people who have submitted grant applications from other agencies or other groups is a good thing, because you can network and get information, ask questions of them. Another thing I do when I'm looking at submitting for a grant is I look at what their scoring matrix is, because I want to make sure that I'm checking the box to get as high of a score as possible for each section. And, a lot of grants do have a scoring matrix. If they don't give it to you up front, don't be bashful about calling the person listed as the contact and asking, hey, do you have a scoring matrix? Can you share it with us? Because normally, they do have that. And, usually it's something that is shareable, and maybe they just forgot to put it out when they sent the package out for the grant application. Next step, once you read all through that and thought about your time frame, how much time you have to get things in, is to put together your strategy. And, when I work on a strategy, I usually see there's some components to each grant application, and these are the big sections that I kind of classify things into. What are the questions and who's going to respond to them? The financial plan. Maybe there's pieces and parts of more information we need to gather up, and then letters of support. So normally, if it's just me working on it, I try to schedule this out in my own schedule so I know I've got enough time to get each piece finished. But hopefully, you've got a team of people working with you, and you can have them assigned portions of this process in order to help you. I will tell you, on your letters of support, I have found through the years that that's probably the first thing I do is make phone calls about those, because it's going to take a little bit of time to get those letters. And a lot of times that whoever it is you're asking for a letter of support from might even say, hey, can you just draft something up and send it to me? And then that way we can get it signed off on our letterhead. So that might seem like something that's going to be an easy lift, but sometimes it's not. So I try to get ahead of it to make sure that it doesn't come back to bite me in the end. Another piece that I'll warn you about is the financial information. Check your numbers and check them again, and then have somebody else check them, because I have had situations where I've sent financial information in that, even though I thought it was correct, it wasn't. And it really left me looking poorly in the eyes of the people that were um, working on, looking over those applications. So, but I really hope that you're able to pull a team together of people. I will mention, as people are helping you, you probably should have one person though that is the final drafter or editor of your information, just so there's a consistent voice, like things are being called the same. That's really important. So, and then make sure they understand the time schedule, because the time schedule can be critical. Um, and make sure that, they really know that, what the deadlines are and that they're going to follow through with it. If you have somebody who has a hard time following through and getting things turned in on time, you probably don't want them on your team for the grant process. If you're lucky, maybe you have a grant coordinator in your agency, and that would be the person who can head this up and, help pull the team together that's going to apply. Um, so I am curious, how many of you actually have a dedicated individual that does grant writing as your grant coordinator? Yeah, I was thinking the no was going to be pretty large there. So far, we've got one, two that have dedicated grant coordinators, and there's some that are rotating the responsibility. So it's okay if you don't have someone, though. I mean, if you're interested in, taking this on and getting the applications in, over time, you're going to become the go-to person. And, don't be afraid of it. The worst thing that can happen with a grant application is they'll tell you no. And you're in no worse position than you were before you sent it in if they tell you no. But if they tell you yes, I mean, look what you were able to accomplish, and you'll never know unless you apply. So, don't fret if you don't have a grant coordinator. You know, you can still pull a team together and get things done. I saw this cartoon and I just had to put it in the presentation. I always talk about trying to stay ahead of the curve, and this little cartoon says, we were ahead of the curve and then the curve ran right over us. And if that happens to you while you're putting an application together and you don't manage to get it in, it's okay. The world is not going to come to an end. and you're going to have information pulled together that you can use for another application. So what to request? And we kind of talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but I think it's important to, have that conversation about what is it that you really want to request. And one of the things you're going to find is that very rarely are you going to see a grant available that's going to provide 100% of your project's funding. That overused phrase of skin in the game, that's what the grantors, the people who give the money, want, is they want the recipients to have, some money in there as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your agency or your company's funds. It could be that you're leveraging funding sources from other places. So, I would definitely look at that. And I'm going to talk to you about an example here in a second. But when you look at the grant, make sure you understand what it is that they are intending to fund, because normally a grant is not going to fund what they consider ordinary operating expenses, like payroll, overhead, unless it's a portion of expenses that is to get a project started. Or that if they say that they'll fund a portion of it, it's going to be normally just what's directly applied to the project, say the person that was assigned to the project to get it executed, the overhead that accompanies that person. But normally they're not going to, just as a rule, fund those type of ordinary operating expenses for your agency. So I would definitely not look for grants to be something that's going to provide that funding. And you do need to know what it is your agency or organization can afford to contribute to the project. So get your pro forma together, your financial plan together for the project. And then, like I said, I would look for other funding sources. For roadway projects, there's always OPWC, the Ohio Public Works Commission here in Ohio, that we're fortunate to have. I would also look within your community. There might be some foundations or other nonprofits in your community that would be willing to help fund, pedestrian improvements or, sidewalks or even the after school programs that were mentioned, and look to them as a help for that matching funding. One thing that I've done in the past, and Google's a great tool for this, is I've gone out and Googled for the tax returns from nonprofits. They have to file annually if they have over $50,000, a tax return that's called a Form 990. And I'll go out and ask Google to pull those up, and then I'll maybe put in the county that I'm working in or the city area that I'm working in to see what nonprofits are out there, because the tax returns have to be public record, and then see who they're funding. What type of projects are they funding? And maybe that's something then that you can look at and reach out. You can reach out to them to see if they'll be willing to be a funding source you could leverage to get even more funding. This is an example of a project that got funded in my community. This is the park that I was on the board for a while, but we never did get to the portion after we had what happened is our school district took our old park to build the new school on, oh gosh, 20 years ago now. I'm dating myself here. And since our park was going to be gone, we worked together with our township trustees to get a grant for the land for a new park. And then we had a park board, a nonprofit we put together to help raise money for developing the park. We had 6 ball fields we built. We built a pony league field, a football field, a concession stand, but we never got to a playground. So we had this young man who did end up getting his Eagle Scout. This was his Eagle Scout project. He decided that he wanted to take on working with the township to try to get a grant through the Department of Natural Resources. But there's a 25% match that's required for those grants. So he went out and looked for ways to raise funds to come up with that 25% match. And they were successful through like scrap metal drives, a hat day at the high school, different community donations. and raising that 25%. And then he was able to, you know, work with the township on their grant application to show that this money was there. And they were able to get $13,500 to buy that playground equipment you see in the background. And then there was in kind as well from the township for digging the footer for it and all that. And then the scout with a group of friends was able to get that installed. So, I mean, there's ways if you really want to get something done to get your projects accomplished. And I would, definitely encourage you to look beyond your agency's budget to other nonprofits and other sources in the community. So I'm curious to know, those of you on the call, what other funding sources have you used and leveraged in the past as a part of a grant application to show that you had the matching funds? I know it'll take a second to type things in. State revolving fund, there you go. OPWC, absolutely. Hope and a prayer. That's kind of like where the project with the scout was, a hope and a prayer, but it got answered. BWC, local donations, yep. Bonds, bank account with available cash, that's always a good thing to have. TISMO funds, fundraising, absolutely. Local utility grant programs, a SIB loan, that's the state infrastructure bank through ODOT where you can get a loan. A local levy, if you're successful enough to get that passed, that's great. Oh, here we go. We've got some items coming into the question box as well. One person said that they worked with their local organizations, the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club. That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Look at sources that are beyond just the government grant funds, private investment, yep, to see what else, is available that can help you with this. All right. So this, I think, if you've not listened to anything else so far, listen to this part. When you are writing a grant application, please, please, please answer the question that is being asked. Just give them the facts. They're reading a lot of applications. And if they are reading an application and responses that are not giving them the information that they asked for, it really starts to drag down on the people that are reviewing the applications. So, also please make sure you're using plain language. You want to make certain that you're communicating succinctly and don't put them on an acronym overload. I know that it's a joke here at ODOT about how many acronyms sometimes can we come up with, but you know, spell things out. Don't assume that they know what an acronym is that you normally use every day, especially when you're looking at other funding sources. Make sure that they understand what it is that you're talking about or asking for. Sometimes I feel like the folks who get the applications in and have to review them, this is kind of what they're challenged with. They've been given so much information and it's just all over the place. But you really need to use that, you know, list of questions. And what I do is I take the questions right out of the grant packet and I dump them in a Word doc and then I just start answering the questions in the Word doc and pulling the information in. And I'm very careful to make sure that I'm responding to exactly what they've asked for and not what I think they asked for or what I really want to tell them, even though they didn't ask for it, because I don't want them to feel like I'm wasting their time. And I want them to say, look, this person, these are the questions that were asked, and this is the responses to it, and they did exactly what we asked them to do in the response. So they're going to follow through then, hopefully, and do what they're saying they are with the money too. So, One person commented in the question box, this says, how do you answer, how will you accomplish completion of the project? They said that can be 3 sentences or 3 pages. You know, what I tend to do when they ask that question is I put it in a graphic. I'll put together a chart that shows the steps for project completion and the dates that we plan on getting those completed. Because sometimes I think a picture or a graphic can, speak volumes. And it's so much easier sometimes for someone to look at that versus, having to read through 3 pages worth of this is how we're going to complete the project. Another person referenced there, it says, oh, they're talking about the acronyms. It says, one time I saw a person thought the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, being referred to as the American Dental Association. That's a perfect example, because not everybody who's going to be reviewing your applications is in the same field and does, what you do. So perfect example why you need to spell things out. But don't make the people who are reviewing your applications feel like this poor person standing there in front of that board. Give them a simple, response, plain language, make sure you're just giving them what they've asked for, not what you think or want them to ask for. And I mentioned it before, but consistency is the key. Even if you have a team, you're fortunate enough to have a team working on your grant application, you know, have one person who pulls it all together and makes the language consistent and the way that things are being described consistent. And build that time into your process. Make sure that that person has enough time to do that. Because when it's being read then by the folks who are hopefully going to give you that grant award, they're not going to get lost because one item was called this name up here, but in this next question it was called something else. That makes it's another level of difficulty for them, and you don't want to make it difficult for them to give you money. Relationship building. This is important all throughout the entire time you're writing grants. I think I knew in my community that I had accomplished a good portion of relationship building, at least with our community foundation, when there was a letter that came one time for a grant that we had asked for a nonprofit in the little village I live close to. And the letter went to the nonprofit, but they had scratched out the nonprofit, like where they said, "Dear so-and-so," they scratched that part out, the nonprofit's name, and the person who was the executive director wrote down Victoria. And so it was Dear Victoria, and Victoria was handwritten in. I thought, you know what, I've built a relationship. That person knows that I'm the one writing these and they know who I am. And, and I think that's really important because if they know that, you're reliable and you will get the funds spent, that's what they want. Spend them and do it right with the project. And so they can point to a great project and say, look what we were able to be a part of. If you get invited to present on your grant request, don't ever pass that opportunity up. And I know we're in a virtual world and that it takes time to drive places, but if you can present in person, that is so much better than doing it virtually, because that will put you in the room with the people who have read your application and are making the decision on the grant funding. So make that personal connection. And even if you don't get funded, at least you were there and they know that you cared enough to be there and that they'll know who you are the next time you apply. I think that relationship building is critically important. Also, don't be afraid to follow up on an application, but don't become a pest. And I don't ever want that anybody who I'm calling to follow up on an application to get the same look on their face that this young lady does on the screen when they see my number come up on the caller ID. I don't want to be a pest, but at the same time, there are instances where, for one reason or another, funding gets delayed. And, it's fine to follow up and find out what's going on, maybe what the new deadline is for when it's going to be awarded, but don't make the person on the other end of the phone get that look on their face before they answer your call or when your email pops up. Another thing I do with relationship building is I look at what they have, meaning the granting agency has awarded in the past and what it is that they're actually funding. So what's the level of funding they're giving? What type of projects are they awarding? And if they don't have this information readily available, ask them for it. Say, I just want to understand the types of projects that your foundation or your organization, likes to fund because, I want to make sure that it's a good fit for everybody. I don't want to waste your time. And they'll tell you, normally they actually, have the list out there on a website or somewhere. So, um, I'm curious to know ways that you've learned what grantors have funded in the past. So for those on the call here, how have you been able to dig into that information? I've shared some ideas with you. Ask them, pull up their 990 tax return because they have to list the biggest projects they funded on there. Um, and if you don't have responses to this one, that's okay too. You can think about it some more and start digging into it. Oh, I like that. Website, news articles, researching their past awards. Yep, that's great. Google can be your friend. The Federal Highway website, yep. I know on our LTAP newsletter, whenever we put a funding corner article in there, I try to make sure that we give examples of projects that have been funded in the past with that program. So hopefully you can see yourself in one of those projects and say, hey, that's somewhere that I want to make sure I apply for the next time. Subscribing to updates, contacts from other funding sources, absolutely. I've gotten so much information when I network with other people that write grants. I even call up, the agencies or, groups that are giving the grants and ask them, say, do you know um, of any other place that, you know, I could apply to as well for funding for this project, especially when it's something that doesn't quite fit in their area and they feel bad about it. They'll be like, well, yeah, so and so they've got this grant or that grant that you could look at applying for. So great. These are some good responses. I'm going to make sure I send out the responses to everybody after we get done with the webinar today. And yeah, definitely ask for feedback, knowledge of other grants that are out there. Because once you get those relationships built, you know, they're going to want to help you as much as you've helped them by, accepting the grant funding that they've awarded you and getting your projects done. They're going to know you're reliable then, and they're going to want to help you to hopefully obtain even more funding and help people that they've networked with to find somebody who's a great grant recipient who will follow through and execute the project. And, because everybody then wins at the end when it's been properly funded and executed. So I want to open things up for questions that you might have. Um, I know that folks have been using the question box, so I've got it open here on my screen. If there's any additional questions you want to put in. And I'll also put up my contact information while we're waiting for any questions to come in. And hopefully, oh, it's fine to email me specific questions. I always tell folks, once you've been on one of my grant writing webinars, you are welcome to email me, call me at any time with questions about grants, maybe how to approach something, if at how with steps you might want to put together if you're just getting started to get this completed. We even have a little tutorial if you need help getting your UEI number that I've had the LTAP staff put together that I can send you. Because we did find that some folks were having a problem with that. So we put a tutorial together, primarily focused towards our townships because they have to have that before they apply for the township sign grant, which, by the way, if you have never been funded before and you are a township in Ohio, you are eligible to apply now. It's no longer limited to just 200 townships each year. So please, if you're a township and you've never been funded on the Township Sign Grant Program, take a look at the information on the Township Sign Grant page and get an application in, because we want to make sure that we get as many safety signs out there in great condition as we can to keep folks safe on the roads. So, all right, there's no other questions that have come in, so I'm going to give everybody back about 10 minutes of their scheduled time. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar. Um, it says no questions. Now, just want to thank you for the program. This person's in Florida and they feel that Ohio LTAP has great programs. Thank you very much. We appreciate that and hope you're enjoying your time in sunny Florida. Someone asked where they could find a copy of this webinar. In the handout box, I have put in a PDF of the presentation, and I also put in a handout outline if you just want like the Cliff Notes version. It's a two-page back and front if you print it double-sided. And oh my gosh, thank you, Linda. She says, this was clear and concise. I think I can do this. I know you can, Linda. Absolutely. And, I'm here if you have any questions or need any help. But yes, and we will actually also, after the presentation, send out a link to the recording if we were successful with it. And we will send out links to both handouts in the handout box if you weren't able to download them from there. All right, everybody. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. If you're in Monroe County this evening, I'll be seeing you at the Township Association meeting. I'm speaking down there during your dinner. So everyone take care. Bye-bye.